Hello you, it's me. Today we're going to talk about the short story collection published this year called Hag, which was originally a podcast of 8 short stories. I think there's 10 or 11 in here. It's had some added, selected and got together by Professor Carolyne Larrington, who is a professor of medieval English literature with a specialty in Norse Icelandic folk tales and Arthurian folk tales. And you can really, even in the preface, smell her passion for storytelling coming off the page in waves. A lot of what I'll say to introduce this book is said in the preface, so it's really giving insight into the motivation behind the collection without sort of me taking your hand and walking you through every single story in here. Larrington commissioned authors, all female authors, including queer authors, authors of colour, to readapt a classic UK folktale, assigning each author a folktale set in the place they live, a place familiar and with meaning to them. One of the great results of this is that you get this extraordinary array of settings which represent the UK. You have the quiet farmhouse, the city apartment of the recluse, the nursing home, the quiet village, the storm-racked shore. The authors who contributed to this collection are Daisy Johnson, Eimear McBride, Emma Glass, Kirsty Logan, Natasha Carthew, Mahsuda Snaith, Liv Little, Naomi Booth, Imogen Hermes Gowar, Irenosen Okojie. And each of the stories in here either revolves around a woman or has a woman central to the plot. I'm also going to throw in that I haven't reviewed many short story collections on here, so I'm still not 100% sure on the best way to do it, but we'll give it a go again. Firstly, this book is a homage to verbal storytelling. It speaks about a shift in tone of folk stories in the 18th and 19th century when a lot of them were put to print for the very first time, and a lot of older folk stories were warped or just omitted because they contained subjects deemed to be inappropriate, probably because they unashamedly discussed important issues and didn't have the cliche and necessary rosy-cheeked children, damsel in distress, white male knight to the rescue. The collector speaks about how many folktales are formulaic in nature, how most people know the endings of these stories, but each author will take you on a different journey to that ending. Changing the tale again and again is honestly how folk stories work, with a million things springing up from the same root. Adapting them again and again to tell a message to a new audience, in a new way, and discuss important topics of any given period, which I think is great. The collector talks about the influx of European and German literature into the UK, with characters from, like the Brothers Grimm, Hans Christian Andersen becoming the norm and what people are familiar with, and how they swamped the market and pushed a lot of UK folklore characters or themes into the background and almost into obscurity. And it's only now that these things are really going through a renaissance and being brought into the light again, which I think they really need to be. So a lot of the stories and scenarios in here, because of that, are probably not going to be too familiar to people who aren't from the UK. But this is stuff that absolutely needs resurrecting. And one of the fantastic things I think this collection does is it has the new adaptations of the story, and then right at the end, it has a small section with the original stories. So if you're not familiar with the route that the readaptation comes from, you can sort of do a direct comparison. With these new takes on classic stories, it's not really a change of setting that is what makes them interesting or sort of re-interesting, but examining the myth and the characters, the relationships and implications from a new angle. Take the Selkie myth, for example. There's a Selkie story in here with a person who can change back and forth between human and seal by donning a seal skin. Most stories are romance stories. They'll talk about love, they'll talk about a child lost to a Selkie, they'll talk about the plight of a Selkie having their seal skin stolen and an aspect of their life they can never get back. But what about the woman with a stranger's child and how she'd be ostracized by her community for that? Or the child itself and how the child would deal with living between two parents and essentially two different worlds. I think modern takes have to focus on the implications these things would have on people's minds, how people would react in a real-life scenario to having these bonkers fairy tale things happen to them. I think a big part of being up-to-date and original with this type of story is having humans in it, rather than fairy tale humans who we look at very much from outside and whose internal monologue is very closed off to the reader. The collection does challenge the tropes and cliches of fairy tales that we're used to. One I was really impressed by was The Tale of Kathleen, which was really cleverly done. It was written in a very spoken word format, like the narrator telling you a story, interspersing the story with their own opinions and input, keeping you invested, building up the plot, and at the same time, they're totally deconstructing it, denouncing the cliches openly and cynically, and second-guessing their own embellishments to the story that they're adding on as they do it. But all the while, the story itself and the narration, language-wise and vibe-wise, feels very, very Hans Christian Andersen, and it was probably one of the more fairy tale-sounding stories in here. So the contrast in that one between content and language was very cool. In the challenging of tropes and looking at things in a new light, this collection does feel very Angela Carter. There are authors using their own heritage as inspiration in here, sorely needed for fairy tale updates, especially in the UK, which is the meeting point of 100 cultures. There's a really fantastic story in here, for example, based on the old tales of British moorland escaped panthers, from a new angle, with a collector of these animals having accidentally bought somebody who is a cursed shapeshifter, keeping her locked in a cage, a woman from another land. There's hints of messages about slavery roots to the story, but this collection tackles so much. Slavery, domestic abuse, love, relationships, trauma in a big way. But it's all in such a graceful way that it doesn't feel like the stories have an agenda and are trying to teach you something. But back to the Panther one, yes, it's staying true to the original story in parts, but then adding entirely new elements of magic in. So that where you would have expected a modern adaptation to sort of shy away from the magic side of it, this one actually feels more fairy tale than the original. These stories, beyond the obvious folktale, have very horror elements to them. And outside of this collection, under one umbrella, you could probably class them all as new weird. They do really have a sense of unease, which I think is very important. We read classic folktales and fairy tales now as something fun, but when they were written and originally constructed, they were so as warnings, as be very careful stories. And by updating the stories, not just in terms of setting, but in terms of modern issues, this collection makes the stories very unsettling again, and probably for a lot of people, very distressing to read. I absolutely love this collection. I give it a solid, very well-deserved 5 stars. Second best short story compilation I've read this year after Julia Armfield's Salt Slow, which just blew me away, but I loved this. If you've read it, I'd love to know what you think of it. Leave a comment down below. Don't forget to like and subscribe. There's more stuff coming. As always, I read pretty quick. Follow me on Twitter. I'll drop the link below. Thanks for watching. I'll see you soon.